Thanks, everyone. I'm Todd Ulise, Senior Vice President of Ad.net. Been in digital marketing for 25 years. Ran a marketing division at Universal for a number of years. Started an ad agency. And last 12 years, we realized Google was somewhat had a big amount of supplier control, so we built an ecosystem outside of it. So that's my background. Love to hear your background, Carolyn.
Amazing. Good morning, everyone. Carolyn Dawkins. I am the Chief Marketing Officer for David Yurman. I've been in role for about a year. So hopefully you've seen some of the exciting stuff happening. I grew up in CPG, so working for organizations like Procter & Gamble, Colgate, and Kellogg's. Moved to the US. I'm not putting this accent on just for the fun of it. Moved to the US and worked for L'Oreal, Google, and Estee for some time before being lured across to the shiny objects that are luxury jewelry. So it wasn't hard to say yes. But thanks for having us here today.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. And thank Brand Innovators for obviously always putting on a great event. I know who went to dinner last night. Yeah, so whoever did, it was a great dinner, a good time. So thanks, Brand Innovators. You guys obviously do a great job. So you've been at David Yurman for about a year. What appealed to you about the opportunity to kind of come into David Yurman?
I think for those of us in the room that are brand builders, it is really hard to unlock brand stories. A lot of the brands that we've worked on have been crafted out of PowerPoint decks, maybe, on people's desks. What's beautiful about the David Yurman brand is that David and Sybil are both acclaimed artists. David is a sculptor, Sybil is a painter, and it was through their artist journeys that they created this really unique expression of jewelry. And I think for consumers, they haven't heard a lot of that story. Like, there's still so much runway. I think the other thing that's super exciting about this brand is that it's always been tied to culture. It has had so many big cultural moments. We've had a lot in the last 12 months, and there's so much more to do. I think the second thing behind that is, I'm someone who is driven by results and is driven by growth, and it's a brand that's in hyper-growth phase. It may not be obvious. Not a lot of luxury brands are in hyper-growth phase, but it is, and I think you've got an amazing exco there as well, who's very focused on driving that transformation. So I think as a CMO, hearing that, having the support behind that, and having so much opportunity to drive innovation across all facets of marketing was definitely an easy hook to bite into.
Nice. They're obviously lucky to have you with the experience you have. As you're growing a company, it's still obviously key to, maintain the roots, or maintain the core and the value. Obviously, family-owned company. Tell us a little bit more how you're balancing kind of growth while still maintaining, the roots and the value to the consumer, of David Yurman.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the key things that we've worked on as I joined was really defining what are the roots and what are the anchors of a brand. Roots are fantastic. It's what you want to keep feeding and watering. Anchors are what's holding you back. And so I think spending the time defining that was really important for our business, and it's why we were able to move so quickly and do so many exciting things last year. I think in terms of our roots, as a brand, we are deeply ingrained in art, in creativity and craftsmanship. And gone are the days, I think, where consumers were really focused on what's the it bag or what's the it item. They are really focused so much more on timelessness and longevity. And so finding those codes in your brand really matter. So really defining what those are. I think the other piece is defining what are the culture moments that we can own and how to tell those stories through those moments. I think that was super valuable. I think the other piece that we know is that we have some really powerhouse collections, but we were never that front-facing with our collections. So that was another big evolution, like telling the story there. I don't know if you saw any of our campaigns with Sophia Richie last year, but that was one of the big pivots that you can see us making. I think in terms of some of the anchors, I think this is where brand positioning and execution from the past kind of get muddled. So we've been kind of cleaning that up as well.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously mentioned the Sophia Richie kind of campaign. What are some of the successes that you've seen, and how are you possibly looking to amplify that? Now that you've obviously had a year looking at the anchors as well, how are you possibly looking to amplify that? In 2024?
Yeah, so I think the last conversation was very much around customer segmentation. So that was one of the key things that I did with the team as I joined. Like, we're sitting on a ton of first-party data as well, which is super rich. I think like all of us, like we've always got to go out and append the data because there's only so much richness that you can get from transaction type data. But building out that customer segmentation was the first thing that we did. And I think there was a couple of segments for women that we identified that we had a lot of headroom versus our competitive set. So based on that segmentation, we then also built a product segmentation. And so what you can see with the Sophia Richie campaign is that we were focused on two core segments, and we had really connected one product to it. Against these two segments, it's being really focused on where you're going to find them. We know as a brand that we drive a significant amount of acquisition by winning in big, creating these really big, impactful social moments. So this is where that consumer learns about new brands, they learn about new products. This is where they really start to dive in. And so I think you may have seen before the brand had a long tenured celebrity kind of model with Scarlett Johansson. If you want to win on social, it's really important that you have all the levers turned up. So we really hunted for the right social talent. And last year you could not miss Sophia Richie. She was everywhere, every social platform. And because she was also tied to this, quiet luxury moment, it was phenomenally connected to a product that we were launching, which was very much around a more understated expression of our cable motif of the house, so sculpted cable. So combining this product launch with this talent and a really powerhouse 360 activation really kind of awakened the consumer to the brand again and kind of, solidified us back on the cultural map, which I think was fantastic, right? And I think if you think about some of the personalization discussion that we're having, this was happening at a mass level. This was important that all of those target segments were seeing this because this was helping reignite the expression of the brand positioning. It was really helping at that macro point. Underneath, at the lower levels of the funnel, and then across all of our owned platforms, so our site and email, there was much more hyper-segmentation that was happening in order to push the right product to the consumer, which is exactly what we saw with the conversion results at the end of the day.
Yeah, you talked a few times about the personalization, and activating obviously in the right moments on social. How much more, from your background, are you saying, okay, we need to look to grow our business intelligence analytics team to kind of double down on, getting that personalization piece, and obviously talking about the future. How much are you guys looking internally, but to kind of grow that piece of the business?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that question in two ways. I think personalization matters enormously. But if you don't have the brand magic and you don't have the storytelling, the creativity and the conceptual storytelling sitting on top of it, it just becomes a race to the bottom. And I think that's what we see consumers react to that. Like, personalization matters, but you have to be really artful in terms of what are you feeding into those different personalization stories. So into those different personalization layers. So how we're doing it in a couple of different ways. I think one of them is we think about the customer experience team a little bit differently than, maybe how we may have in past, just it very much around just CRM, just email journeys, et cetera. So we've really taken this out, and it's very much focused on 360 omni activations because every touch point should have some level of personalization. I think the other piece is it is the data that we're using. It's the way we're analyzing the data. Yes, we do some of it in-house, but we're also not shy to tap partners. I think a lot of this space is moving very quickly, and I think some of the partners that we bring in, I think they're amazing in terms of holding a mirror up to you, in terms of here's where you're getting it right and here's where you're getting it wrong. We work with someone, I used to work with him at Google, Avinash. He has an agency, it's Crowd, out of the UK. And it's been phenomenal. Like, they really came in and kind of kick-started a couple of areas of the business that we needed a little bit more focus on. So I think that's one area. I think when you think about what's going to feed the personalization, like AI, I believe very much in this idea of like renting upfront before you buy, like really renting to learn what's working before you buy. So spending a lot of time with the right agencies and or the right vendors and renting and testing and learning, which we've been doing a lot on. And I think the last thing is as marketers, we're challenged with what is the right KPI, what are the right metrics, what is it that we should be looking for. I think with our team, we are 100% focused on it is incrementality. We get asked the question a lot, what happens if all the marketing turned off tomorrow? What would happen? So I constantly have to show, well, what happens when the marketing's turned on? And that truly is an incrementality. It's nice to have all the layout metrics. They're great. They're great to have, further along in the discussion, but the incrementality discussion is key.
Yeah, I mean, obviously activating in social, what else are you kind of leaning into? What do you think might be, beneficial, obviously for your brand, be it a channel perspective, kind of coming into this year that, to your point, might be, hey, this potentially could be incremental to kind of obviously find some net new customers?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things around our brand versus maybe some of our luxury competitors is that we acquire at a much higher rate. We are a really interesting brand where we can bring new consumers into prestige jewelry, but then move them around and really kind of live with them throughout their life cycle, which is fascinating. Not every brand can do that. So our customer segment, if you can imagine our segmentation, even if you just cut it down to the demographics, it's pretty even, which is fascinating. And the volume of our acquisition is wild. Like, it's not something that I've seen before, and certainly not in luxury. So that is key. It's very key to manage that acquisition strategy. But then also in luxury, the retention is hugely valuable. I know you guys were having a discussion before about 80-20. I mean, you could imagine in luxury, like your VIC, VVIC, they are worth a fortune to the business, and you need to protect them because my VIC, listen, they're also Tiffany's VIC. I know they're Louis Vuitton's VIC. I got to protect them. So I know I need to give them a very unique experience. And I think if you think about your customers in the same way, and I think that's what they were saying, they're not just your VICs. They're not just your loyal customers. They're not just your high-value customers. They are probably the same for one or two of your competitors. So what does that mean for the strategies that you put behind it? I think the other thing that we've spent a lot of time decoding is where are the channels that we gain the greatest amount of incrementality. And I think as a business that has so much headroom in terms of awareness and brand familiarity, we are also the number one player in men's jewelry, and men are just starting to open up the category. So finding the right channels for those customers, they're very different. They're very different. Like, search plays an enormous role for us, but obviously it's organic search, right? And it's a very hyper segmented organic search, which is fascinating. I think the other thing for us is some of our biggest acquisition moments in the year have come through our peak social conversation moments. So obviously Sophia was one of them. Fascinatingly enough, the consumer took over our brand for back to school with a few sororities. So Bama Rush was one of them. And these were enormous, where the consumer just created such a massive moment that we were able to very quickly get behind and put paid support behind it. So understanding the right channels and the channels for incrementality are some key areas for us as well.
No, it's good that you have you kind of said earlier, balancing the growth mindset, with obviously kind of understanding the anchors and the core of the business. So in terms of, talk about the customer experience, obviously being a luxury brand, how do you nurture that? Because ultimately we had this conversation, there was a conversation a few of us were having yesterday. It's nurturing that customer experience. Consumer always remember how they feel with your brand. How are you looking to nurture that? And, what are some of the things that, you could obviously impart to the group?
I think when you think about your brand's experience, it's important to come back to your positioning and start there. Like, what is the definition of the experience that you want your consumer to walk away with? So one of the things that is deeply ingrained in our brand is it was built by David and Sybil Yurman. It is run today by Evan Yurman. The family legacy is really deep. The families spend a lot of time with their clients. So this idea of intimacy and intimacy with the family really resonates with our customer. So we think about that a lot in our experiences. How do we create these moments that feel very intimate with the Yurmans or extensions of the Yurmans? So we do a lot of events. Events are really important to our customers. We have very focused gifting strategies, very focused outreach strategies. Our BAs are best in class. The clienteling technology that we use that also feeds, we clientele all the way from e-com to retail to wholesale and back again. I think the other thing that you'll see us do in 24 as well is that we are very focused on bringing our 360 programs towards our customer experiences. So we've got an amazing partnership that we're going to kick off for our men's customer. It's going to be huge for content, huge for earned media, but we've also found a track where we can bring our VVIC, and potential VVIC into that experience as well. So it really does feel like the experience is touching everyone. So I think thinking through that, we do that a lot when we launch a new campaign as well. We think about, listen, what is the experience for our existing customers by tier beyond just what we're putting out in our paid and our owned channels.
Yeah, talking a little bit more about, as you said, the untapped market, leaning into the men's sector. Have you found that you've charged your team with building a whole different marketing strategy, deployment strategy, reaching your ICP of those certain types of men? Is it a completely different new business initiative, that you're seeing on your end?
Yeah, I think when I first got there, I think what I noticed the team were doing is they had an overarching strategy that then kind of had a pillar for women and a pillar for men. It was fundamentally mirrored. And so if you think about how that would go wrong, right? Like the men's side of the business had an influencer strategy where they were hunting for influencers. Men don't really follow influencers. They follow athletes, right? Like that is the number one influencers for men are athletes. And so we had to go back and kind of rebuild that whole thing. We've got an amazing plan now that's coming out, but it's a very different model. So you've got to be very, very focused. And once again, this is where the data doesn't lie. But I think even as a marketer, right, like deeply investing yourself in that customer's lifestyle and what drives that customer is just as important as hunting through the data.
And as you're obviously growing the business, opening up to additional segments, obviously there's a lot you could test, right? What kind of framework do you put on criteria? Do we need to know by a certain timeline? I know Nike has it. How does it make you feel? Like what kind of, there's always the adage of fail fast. What types of criteria do you put on to say, oh, this might be a starter, or this might not be, we might not lean into here. Do you have a kind of a framework you've used based on your experience in past?
Yeah, listen, recommending Sophia Richie was definitely a bold move early on in my tenure. But I think once again, there was enough sniff test of the data that it didn't feel like a test. So I think what's exciting about our brand is that we move with agility. We do a ton of testing across site, across email, across media. In the luxury space, it's really hard to get founders and senior leaders to be comfortable with testing creative. I think what is exciting, though, is that you can sell them conceptually and with some supporting data. So I think what we do on the creative side is we use enough of the data that we can find. You are fundamentally seeing us test creative all the time, but we're testing it live. And I think that's probably one of the differences with luxury versus like deeply long test and learn scenarios with creative. We do everything else behind the scenes, but that one's a little bit different.
Yeah, no.
And we're hunting for incrementality. Everything we're looking for is, are we driving incremental, whatever the metric is, versus if we did not do this.
So kind of shifting a little bit, this is obviously the future of retail. Being a marketer and experience, what excites you, kind of the next shiny new object? What excites you, whether or not you're going to implement the organization, but what excites you as a marketer?
I think all of the new technology around better clienteling, and I think the personalization that can happen at store, that's really exciting. And I think in past it was all very theoretical. It was complex technology. I think the things that we're seeing now and the things that we're starting to implement are really fascinating, and I think they change the experience. Because I think one of the things that's interesting about our brand is that our consumer comes in for moments of joy throughout the year. So they're moments of joy connected to generally what we call high traffic moments, Mother's Day, Father's Day, holiday, etc., gifting moment, birthday moments, etc. So the more that we can personalize in store, which is a balance of technology and then the BA utilizing that technology, or then our e-com team or our CRM team picking that up after, like that's the magic, like making them understand that they have had a personal journey pre, during, and post that purchase. I think there's so much to advance there.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately, if they're buying stuff just on the internet, it's going to be, you know, a transactional relationship versus owning the consumer journey, and, you know, how you make the person feel and how the emotional attachment to the brand, and to your point, creating that personalized experience, you know, in terms of technology investing and driving people back into store.
Yeah.
So, you know, I always ask, like, what, you know, obviously you've had great successes in your career. What advice would you give to, you know, people that want to become CMOs? You know, what, you know, paying it forward, you know, to kind of the next generation, you know, what couple of bullet points of advice would you give to a few folks?
Yeah, I think a couple of things for me is I love getting as much experience as you can across a number of different industries. I grew up in CPG. I spent a chunk of time in beauty. I went across to tech, and I'm now in luxury. I think you just pull so much from each experience, right? Like CPG are brilliant frameworks. They are really great strategic thinkers, very, very structured. Then you go to somewhere like L'Oreal, who, like, no one can out-innovate L'Oreal, and the creativity that's there is exceptional. And then, you know, just working inside of Google and the experience of understanding the platforms, understanding the data capabilities, understanding what advanced marketing can look like, and then kind of keep adding to that toolkit, I think is one of the key things that I would recommend. I think that being just voraciously hungry to constantly learn and to grow. I think every day, everything's evolving and shifting, and making sure that you are constantly feeding yourself and using that to feed your team. I think the other thing I would say is, you know, being super focused on the big bets. Like, as a leader, get those big bets defined, ensure that they are indoctrinated across your team, and that's what you're lining up against. I think in marketing, and I'm sure like many of you in the room, right? Like, I have everything from e-com to creative to social to media to comms to everything in between. You have to connect all of those teams against some really big bets in order to hit this incrementality that we're talking about. So being able to pull everything back together across the teams is super critical to achieve the wins.
Yeah. How are you finding that it's, you know, it's moving people in the right direction, right? You know, like measuring what matters. How are you, how have you found, you know, there's certain players that might be more hesitant to that. How much championing do you find, you know, obviously, as you kind of started building, you know, over the last kind of year, that you've had to do, and, you know, getting people to see your vision?
Yeah, I think you learn that you have to keep modifying your style for all of the different individuals that you work with. I think there's an amazing book. It's called Working with Challenging People. It's a great read. If you know anyone like that in your life, I'd recommend that one. I also think that consistency is key. And I think getting your peer set and your senior leaders to buy into that direction, I think helps enormously. I think consistently communicating, and I think, you know, I think one of the things I was speaking to someone the other day. She's a senior leader at Google, and she's building a new team. And I asked her, how's it going? Like, you know, they adore her over there. And she's like, you know what? I thought that I'd communicated enough. I hadn't communicated anywhere near enough. I think if you are a leader that moves fast, you have to communicate 3 times more than you need or than you think is enough. And I learn that about myself constantly, particularly when you're moving fast and you're driving transformation. Over communicating beyond what you think is enough is a critical one.
Yeah, you could lose for all sorts of reasons. Communication should definitely not be one of them. You know, we obviously covered the background, covered the history and the growth of the brand. You even got a recommended reading list. You know, I think, is there anything else you want to cover before we open it up to, you know, the group for questions?
No, I'd love to hear what the group.
Yeah. All right.
Time for a couple of questions.
Hi. You talked about working with Sophia Richie and Bama Rush. And that's great because you're bringing in a young audience who has a long time to be with the brand. But was there any worry that you could alienate some of your VIC by going so young?
Yeah, I think the magic with Sophia, which you could see in the data early on, is that she's really broad in her appeal because she attached herself so closely to Chanel, which is never a bad thing in the luxury space. She was just as interesting to a 50-year-old consumer all the way through to a 15. So she was a very specific read. You're right, there is other influential talent who could have been even like stronger if you wanted to go younger, but her magic is that she is pretty broad, and I think you're right, like that they're unicorns. So when you find a moment like that, grabbing it was super key.
Hey, thanks for a great talk. I loved your point about renting and experimenting, and Rory Sutherland has this idea of great marketers are like great detectives. They're constantly curious and testing. I would love to understand, how are you setting up like your team, your processes and your tools to let you do that? Is there a way that you make that renting, that experimentation possible? Thanks.
Yeah, so we have two things I think I would say is, I think because I spent time in tech, my teams work on roadmaps, like even my marketing team. I still use roadmaps to this day. So we have an experimentation roadmap. So the things that we have planned, right, which generally suck up around 70% of the attention. And then there will be more agile testing that will be done. So there is a clear roadmap against that, which then means there's a roadmap against where we would need external tech and or external support to get this across the line. So we are pretty planned in that regard, but the magic about anything to do with testing is that you do need to be agile as well. We've built out a few new capabilities in the team to do that faster in-house. But I think we continue to learn that sometimes that's the right thing, sometimes that's not the right thing, right? In terms of what's the right model to use, what's the right approach to use, what's the right vendor to use. So it's definitely a balance, but I do think the roadmaps help, particularly when a lot of these tests cross multiple teams, and it enables us to move much faster.
Thank you guys for your time. Jacob Wallach, Social for the Win. I'm a big David Yurman fan. I actually bought a ring in Soho a few years ago, so you have a lifetime customer here.
Come back.
Absolutely.
2 years is too long.
I don't want to put too many rings on, right? It's all about minimalism.
We have necklaces, bracelets.
Fair enough.
I'll show you. I'll show you.
Perfect. Sounds like another conversation for another time. But no, listen, I love that you guys are focusing so much on the men's sector within this space. I feel like there's a lot of up and coming opportunities for men in rings. I mean, I was always interested in them for years, but never really got into the space until I came into the store. I know that you mentioned that, men really look towards athletes as people who influence them in terms of their purchasing power and decisions. I'm curious if you're looking towards anything else. I do see a lot of influencers in the space, more in men's fashion, especially that are up and coming, like stylists in the city and a few other people that have kind of influenced my decisions in terms of purchasing.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to really understand how you look to that as well.
Yeah, you're right. So I just touched on our big kind of ticket social plan, but we also work with culture makers. So there are some stylists in our roster, which we're testing. They generally don't have the same amount of reach, but the goal is that the engagement rate will help them get across the line. Reach is a big opportunity with us for men. I think there are moments for partnerships with culture creators that might be a little bit surprising. So some partnerships with maybe some other brands and their culture makers could be something that we're looking at. But yes, I think the influencer space is when you're trying to marry reach and engagement rate. And once again, like fewer, bigger bets. I think athletes will be one of our big bets, and then you'll see some smaller bets that we'll test. And if they start to get up, then you're right, then we can start to wrap a little bit more around that.
Yeah, thank you. And just one other quick follow-up. So I know that you guys focus a lot on, the style of the jewelry that you have. Like I purchased something from I think it was the Hokusai collection, like the Japanese, like the wave. And the craftsmanship really came, across to me, and that's why I decided to purchase it. Looking at like a brand like a Jacob & Co., right? Like on TikTok, like they focus on their product. Like that's a majority of their content. How do you try to balance, focusing on the customization and maybe even like new and emerging artists that you guys can highlight with that influencer budget that you guys have?
Yeah. We do a lot of this on social today. We do a lot with our own content in terms of like the story behind the design, the craft of the design. I think we've also got our BAs do a lot of content. Consumers love our BA content because they deeply talk through the product and how to style it. So I think we all know this, right? A lot of our social talent already live in-house. So it's a fantastic thing to take away for your brand. I think that craftsmanship is key for luxury. I don't know if you feel it. We feel it. It's become trope. Like everybody's look the same. Someone at a bench working with the stones, working in the metal. So we have to evolve this. It's valuable to the consumer, but we're working on a few new paths in there.
Okay, one last question.
Thank you. It's been really fun to watch the partnership and the campaign you've been working on with Sophia. Thinking about some of her younger followers who, perhaps might not be able to purchase something themselves, but are maybe looking to some resale sites where it's harder for, David Yurman and some of these other brands to control the messaging and kind of the experience that they're having with the brand. Any thoughts on kind of that space and maybe how the brand is trying to show up to make sure that that true craftsmanship and value is coming across?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's different about our brand versus our competitors, again, is that we do have more accessible items. And that's what does really well for these consumers, which is amazing if they're self-purchasing. We also find that a lot of our existing customers introduce the next generation through these gifting moments, which is fantastic. So we focus a lot there as well in terms of getting them to bring them in through birthday, graduation, etc. So creating these moments, which has been a really big win for us. It's also why we're starting to focus even more on telling the unique craftsmanship and then creating more experiences where they would come to our brand. We had a lot of focus this holiday in terms of what would you get exclusively from dy.com if you only purchase there, to kind of move consumers away from other sites. So we think a lot about what can you only get from us, what authentication, what additional gift or experience. So that's how we're really focusing it today, and the moments that they would come in on versus doing anything more direct with those sites.
Thank you. What an amazing wealth of experience that Carolyn has across basically every commerce category, and thanks for leading such a great discussion. Todd, a round of applause, please.